When Nightreigns DLC The Forsaken Hollows dropped, there were a bunch of changes made for the game that have essentially allowed there to be a few different types of meta. Now, what do I mean by that? So obviously we know about the Balancer Relics, now turning the game into an L2 meta. We also have the successive attacks gives you a 35% damage boost from the Glass Necklace, which you get from the Undertaker's Remembrance quest. And there are a few other things that have changed that have allowed the game to be a lot stronger when it comes to melee than it was previously. I'm going to talk about one today, and I do think this genuinely could change the meta of how the game can be played. So, specifically, when patch 1.03 released, which is the patch that was released alongside the Forsaken Hollows, there were some new changes made to the damage boost you get when you have 3 of the same weapon in your inventory. Now, I'm going to talk about the numbers and how much damage boost you actually get, and at the very end I'm going to give you a couple of builds that I've used for a few different characters using, setups based around the 3+ weapon school stuff, and these builds are actually insane, so stick around for that. So, first of all, the improved weapon power up from any category has been improved. I believe it used to be 5% and it's now 10%, so that is quite a big improvement. Back in the day, when everyone first started using the caster build, everyone was saying how powerful the 12.5% boost was you have when using things like Shattering Crystal. So they've brought the melee improved attack power up just to basically counter that, I believe. And then secondly, we've got the 3+ weapon types in your inventory. That has now been improved to 20% damage boost. So just running these 2 alone, which you can run on both your base relics, will give you a crazy damage boost. Now, I know what you're thinking, but Mike, you have to find 3 weapons to actually get the damage boost. That is true, but you can just go to 3 of the first early boss camps, like, the fort, the church, anywhere like that, and you are going to get the weapon that corresponds with your player. Now, obviously, if you're going to be using something like, 3 times Great Hammers on someone like the Wylder, you will need to run something like Dormant Powers finds Great Hammers, but now that you can get those relics in the base game relics, it actually makes it a lot better, because instead of having to waste a slot in the deep relics, you can actually just run that as a base relic and then have like a physical attack up +4. So yeah, it does take a little bit of legwork to get the build off the ground, but you can just go to any of the first forts, camps, churches, and you will be bound to find the weapon of your choice, especially if you're running Dormant Powers. But if you're not running Dormant Powers, I would suggest using the 3+ weapon types for the character that you're actually running. So if you're running someone like the Duchess, have 3+ daggers in your inventory gives you the damage boost, and that way you are bound to find daggers because that is what she gets, and you'll get the damage boost that way. Now, as I previously mentioned, yes, it does require a little bit of legwork, but it is so much easier to go to a fort and 2 churches to get the 20% damage boost than it is to find 4 different Stone Sword keys to go to 4 different evergaols. So, is it better than the evergaols? Obviously not. The evergaols will give you 35%, especially if you're in trios and everyone starts with a Stone Sword key. You can get, another 3 Stone Sword keys just running around. You are going to get a bigger damage boost. If you don't run the evergaols, and you don't want to run around the whole map trying to find Stone Sword keys and then running to evergaol, this will make the runs a lot better, a lot quicker, and it will also make the runs easier because you're going to be fighting bosses, which gives you a higher chance of getting a better weapon and better weapon passives like damage negation at full and so on. And not to mention, you can also obviously run the evergaols and the Night Invaders with this relic passive. If you can find it, obviously, that is all RNG dependent, but you can run them together. So the damage potential is insane, as you can imagine. Right, enough of the yapping, because apparently yapping isn't liked and people don't like it. And in fact, I've had so many comments recently telling me that I do yap too much before getting to the point. So we're going to move on to the builds that I have in question, and I have used these builds in both Depth 3 and Depth 5. They are insane. Right, first up we have everyone's favourite Nightfarer, the man of the meta himself, IRONEYE. Now, I have 2 versions of this build for IRONEYE. This one in particular, you can get up to about 75% damage boost, just calculating the damage boost just from what you get. Remember, they are multiplicative, so it would actually be more than 75%, and I'm not including the evergaols in that, so, if you can get to all 6 evergaols or 7 evergaols, add a 35% top of that, you're going to get like 110% damage boost. Obviously, that's probably not going to happen. The potential is there. Now, the next one is my favourite build so far, and it does lead both into the 3+ weapon types and the Balancers meta. Now, I believe this would only be possible on IRONEYE and Executor, and it would actually be a little stronger on Executor than it would IRONEYE. That's because they're the only pair of Nightfarers that have the red, green, and blue base relic set up. So yeah, essentially, improved skill attack power, you get 20% from both of them. Multiplicative, so obviously you get more than that. Then you get a 5% from each melee attack power. So already, just off the bat from your L2, you're getting 50% damage boost. Then obviously on top of that, you get the successive attack boost power, which is a potential of 35%. So at the minute, we're up to 85% damage boost. And then leading into the deep relics, you've obviously got 2 improved katana attack power, so that's another 20%, so now we're at 105. And then finally, we've got the improved attack power with 3+ katanas equipped, which is another 20% on top. Remember, these are all multiplicative, so the damage potential is going to be insane. Obviously for IRONEYE, you would have to run dormant powers finds katana, so that's why I say it's a little bit stronger on the Executor, because he doesn't need dormant powers to find katanas. He will automatically find katanas, which will free him up for a slot for another improved katana or something else. So let's move off the weebs and now move into the big Chungus, the big Chads, Wylder and Raider. Now this build is a build that I have saved for both Wylder and Raider, and I tend to use it mostly when I'm fighting Caligo or I'm fighting Sentient Pest. Anyone basically that's going to need a big great fire hammer. Obviously the candlestick is what we want, and this is the build I use for that. Now realistically, if you can, you want the dormant powers and the 3+ weapon types on the base game relics if you can. Unless obviously you're running the balancers, then you need at least a red and a blue for the balancers. But realistically, you want to save the deep slots for your physical attack ups or your affinity attack ups or whatever you're using basically. So if you can, try and get at least one of the either dormant powers or 3+ weapon types on the base relics. For the Raider, you don't necessarily need dormant powers finds great hammers, because he will be inclined to find great hammers anyway. The only reason I was running it is because I had it in tandem with one of his personal skills, so that's why I have it on this Raider build. But essentially, 3+ great hammers with the dormant powers finds great hammers if you're running Wylder, and then if you can fit them on, the improved great hammer attack power, and obviously the balance relics. Now, this one's a caster build, and it only really works with the Duchess, and I'll explain why. Recluse and the Revenant, they don't find weapons as their default choice. They find, well, the Recluse will find a stave and the Revenant will find a seal. And you can't get an attack power up for 3+ staves or 3+ seals. What you get is FP up. So that's why it only really works with the Duchess, because the Duchess will find daggers as her default weapon. So as for the build, this is the build that I was running. Essentially the attack up with 3+ daggers equipped. I run that on the base relics. You can obviously run it on either the base or the deep relics. I would advise running it on the base because then it gives you a slot for a magic attack +4 with a Crystallian sorcery or anything else. And yeah, the rest is pretty self-explanatory. Obviously you could swap out the evergaols for another Crystallian sorcery if you didn't want to do evergaols or Night Invader. And then the bottom one is defeating enemies while the art is active. We all know how powerful that is, and that comes with a Crystallian sorcery. Obviously, you can put anything you want in there. I'm just using Crystallian sorcery. You could use Carrion Slicer or whatever. As for the deep relics, it's just standard. Improved Crystallian sorcery or magic attack power. Obviously, you know, it will work with Carrion Slicer as well, or any other sorcery, or sorceries +2. So obviously you pick and choose what you want. But essentially, yeah, with the Duchess, it works really well because she finds daggers as her default weapon. So yeah, as soon as you fought 3 bosses, you get 3 daggers, you get a 20% damage boost. Now, obviously, last thing to say is you are going to have to take up 3 slots for, you know, 3 of the weapon choice that you're using. You can pair it quite well with the Night Invaders, and then most of the time, if you're fighting a Night Invader of your caliber, of your type, you know, the Nightfarer is the same as the character that you're running, you will be able to get a weapon that has pretty decent passives on. And if not, most bosses that you're going to fight are going to give you passives that are relevant to your build, or at least I would like to think they would. So, yeah, you know, there is some pros and cons to it. There are way more pros than there are cons. And yeah, the first build with the IRONEYE katanas, as you can see, it's an insane damaging boosting build, and I genuinely think it could take over the meta, or at least be a part of the strongest meta there is available at the minute. So gamers, that is pretty much all I got to say. Sorry it's 8 minutes long. I did try and make it as short as possible. I am trying to cut out the yapping because clearly people don't like it. People keep mentioning it, which is a shame because I like to talk a lot, and you know, there is a part of me that wants to say, if you don't want to hear me yap, don't watch the videos, but I'm trying to be nice. New year, new me. I'm trying to be kind and all that bullshit that comes along with it. As always, gamers, that's pretty much all I've got to say about the video. Stay safe, catch you on the next one. Big love, peace.